Alright, Acts chapter 10, verse 34 and 35. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, "Of a truth, I perceive that God is no respecter of persons, but in every nation he that feareth him and worketh righteousness is accepted with him." Bible smack. May God bless the reading of his word. Alright, today I am dealing with a topic that honestly has been really rough. I felt convicted to do this video for a while now, and yet at the same time I very much was stricken with fear. Not as much as like, well, somebody's getting angry, go ahead, blah, 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 who cares about that? But basically, just certain people and certain relationships easily getting offended and stuff. Basically, throughout my life, I've had close friends who are African American. Of course, not just that. Also, there are many people, black and white, who are at a stage of naivete about this issue. And so basically, you worry about losing friendships or getting things that are easily miscommunicated. And this deals with the issue of Black Lives Matter, and some of it's really based on the system that they call social justice, and they're social justice warriors and Antifa and all that kind of stuff, kind of springing from this ethic, which I'm going to engage the ethic a little bit more in a separate video. But I wanted to go ahead and respond to this because honestly, people are dying. People are dying in my own stinking city, okay? And they're based off of false ideas. So let's go ahead and deal with a couple things. First of all, I'm going to start off dealing with the memetics, then the logic, then the subjectivity, then BLM and its nefarious dealings. And basically, as I said, it's ironic because a lot of whites typically, what do? They say, "Oh, well, my best friend is black. My friend is black. I'm in an interracial relationship. And that really has little to do with this, and causes more problems than anything else. But basically, when you look at a meme, when I say memetics, now sadly this was started by evolutionists, but I'll take their bad stuff and make it good. So a memetic is basically a bad idea that keeps on surviving and becomes popular, even though it is a bad idea. So when they do this, they start talking about the phrase Black Lives Matter, as if having a group and giving it a title makes it become the title. Okay, so I remember when I was young, Howard Stern called himself the king of all media, and before you know it, people started calling him the king of all media, and eventually trumpeting himself to something else. So this is how this group works, okay? They've taken this title, and therefore they're supposed to represent that group. But there's a lot of things that are problematic. The very first thing, what do you mean black? The generation that I had just gotten through was one where, you had Jesse Jackson and them saying, "We're not black, we're African American." I think about, MJ, Michael Jackson. "I'm not going to spend my life being a color." The problem is that a color, okay, if your skin is pale or dark or brown, does not affect your ethnic background or your nationality or your religion. Okay? So this is a category that is not a true category. Evolutionists are dead wrong. We are not separate species. And what you find with the BLM groups is that they're currently on these ideas of critical race theory and intersectionality. But a lot of them came from the early, they really derive, though, from these liberation theology, black liberation, and these groups accepted evolution, which made ontological differences, and that screws up the whole system. So they basically kind of have a makeover, okay? But now they admit that color is a social construct, okay? If you have a child who is, you know, biracial, what that actually means is that, like, their tone is going to be in the middle of one lighter and one darker, one less melanin, one greater. And then if they have a child with somebody of darker tone, well, then that family goes into a darker direction. If they go into a paler tone, then they go into a paler direction. Okay? And I've met people who are very dark, and yet 100 years ago they have pale ancestors. And I know people who are pale, and 100 years ago they have dark ancestors. This is not a valid paradigm, and so now they're taking a step backwards by the BLM. They're getting away from African American, going into this, well, we're black. And why is that? Because they want to push the color scheme, which gives them a little bit more political upheaval, okay, as opposed to saying, like, Descendants of American Slaves, which is a really productive movement, by the way. But instead of going with that ideology, they want this ideology to include anyone who's either of color or sympathizers. So it's a political strategy. But the problem is that when you think of this color paradigm and you say that America was founded on systematic racism, okay, and I'll go over this meme a little bit more in a minute, but basically when you go with that, then the idea is that, well, they introduced these white, black things and that's racist. Well, then why are you buying into it? Okay? I mean, it's just that simple. Well, when they'll say, Black Lives Matter, and then the respondent goes, well, all lives matter, right? And the guy's like, no, Black Lives Matter, okay? Now, what they're trying to say that means, okay, and what they are basically hypnotizing their followers to believe is that, hey, we're the ones under oppression, therefore, you need to look at us and stop ignoring us using that excuse. The problem is, with this meme, once they said no, not all lives matter, well then they have gone into a racist paradigm. And more to that is the simple fact that if you have the wrong paradigm, you're not understanding the population. Statistically, and especially experientially, what I perceive is that there's a lot more impoverished pale-skinned people than there are impoverished dark-skinned people. Well, they'll say, well, percentage-wise. Okay, but numbers-wise, okay? You go downtown, you run around the block for 20 minutes, and you'll start to find these people on the corner, and these dirty people, if you wipe off the dirt, they're pale, okay? There is more poverty, there is more people being put in prison, there is more police brutality, okay? And you just say, well, what we do is we take the rich pale skins, and then we put them all together, and it balances it out, and so then the dark skin's lower than that. What you're doing is you're saying, your life doesn't matter, poor pale skinned guy, okay? That's really what this comes to. And how that affects things is very traumatic, and it doesn't help anybody at the end of the day. Let me give you an example. My homie, okay, Rand Paul, he just put out something called Breonna's Law, and that was to deal with this issue of the no-knock warrants and things that went on in Louisville. Now, as far as I know, he was the first one to put that out, but since the very beginning of the BLM movement, he has expressed sympathy over the issue of police brutality because his constituency is libertarian, which says no to overreaching government. And police brutality is one of the fruits of overreaching government. And so instead of, like, his route is to say, let's be united. Let's say, hey, if we are going under this unfairness and this oppression from this elite culture, then let's join forces. But now we have this wall that says, no, no, you're not enough. Okay? And when confronted, I have seen BLMs respond this way. We understand you're going through these issues, but we got to get to this right now. And we're looking at the world falling apart. When is now going to happen? Okay? This is a brotherhood that is being ripped apart right there. Okay? And so the top is taking the bottom and splitting them up. Now, this is the problem, is that when you engage in these mimetics, okay, the person of the Black Lives Matter mentality is giving what they call malformed questions so that they don't get the full answer, and they're not capable, because when when they confront somebody, preferably a white person, but anybody, okay, when they do that, and that person says, yes, I understand what you're saying, well, then that person thinks, no, you don't. You're not woke. You don't get it. Or they say, yes, oh, well, then now you need to bow down and grovel before me, blah, blah, blah. Okay? In other words, you need to accept my evidence without giving me your evidence, without giving me your experience, without contributing anything to the idea process. And so this is set up to block the BLM mind from receiving alternative information. Now let's go to the logic. America is founded upon racism. Now every culture, okay, had what we call slavery, alright? And different forms, but generally every culture has ended up with this slavery. You can maybe think of a couple impoverished groups. My theological ancestors, the Anabaptists, okay, they were not founded upon slavery. In fact, they were hiding, okay, for centuries in the hills. And they were so much against it that the Anabaptists in America made it a sin to which you could get excommunicated or shunned if you owned slaves. Okay? But, nevertheless, most of your big societies, alright, had these problems of slavery. Now, when we look at what's going on with, like, the Founding Fathers, there are facts that are not being put into the conversation. Alright, they'd say, well, the founders had slaves. But you got to look at the chronology. Okay, before the Revolution, they were the slaves of Britain. Okay, Britain ruled them and ruled their lives with tyranny through King George III. They had actually protested the African slave trade. And Thomas Jefferson and some others got the Virginia colony to erect a law to stop the African slave trade from coming to Virginia. But King George III was making so much money that he said, no, we're going to override this. Therefore, from here on out, all of America has the slave trade by nature. Okay, so he imposed that by law before America ever got started. All right. The other thing is that Africans not only had slaves, not only sold all the slaves to the Europeans and others like the Arabs. Okay, there's a massive amount. Okay, more slaves went to Arabia, unfortunately under prostitution, as well as slaves going to South America than went to North America by an easy margin. Like 95-96% of the slaves were going to other countries than America. But also, you might remember a patriotic theme done with the Marines, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. What's going on in Tripoli? Well, they had to rescue Americans who were white, okay, who had become kidnapped and enslaved at Tripoli. Well, that was the common practice, that the North Africans would kidnap white people and enslave them. And they did this from the 1600s to about the 1830s or so. So all the way through Thomas Jefferson's life, okay, in his life, they got Africans taking white slaves, okay? So, you know, on one hand, he did give an effort to go out. On the other hand, I mean, there is that situation where his slave was actually his African wife, you know, but I don't want to get too much in the water, and I don't want to act like these guys are perfect either, okay? They did eventually go along with the problems of society. And what we see today is we have plenty of compromisers. Whether we talk about the abortion issue, okay, where you can take a baby's life without its consent, and especially, you know, I've seen the last figure I saw 5 years ago was that 13 million African babies have been slaughtered in the womb. So, you know, you have to deal with that issue. But also, we have globalist markets in which we go into countries that use slave labor or child labor. You know, oh, we'll pay you 25 cents a day type of thing. And basically rule other people. We have sex slavery right now. All right. And a lot of people have not been stepping up to fight those causes and those issues. And I have seen pushback from Democrats, but I don't know if that's fair. It might be Republicans doing it too. And so, you know, right now, there are black slaves in the Sudan. There was a situation where Muslims took and captured a group, I'd like to say it was Sudanese, but I don't think it was Sudanese. I think it was like either Kenya or Uganda or something. But basically about 260 girls from a Christian African middle school. Alright, and the Muslims captured them and then turned them out into prostitutes. And basically, you know, did that thing. He took them to, you know, kidnapped them, took them to Arabia, made them sex slaves. Okay, and Obama was approached about it. And he said, "Hey, it's not my country." Whoopsie. I mean, you know, when you think about, like, what was that one war? Was it Libya? Libya, Obama waged a war on Libya. He didn't have no problem with that. Why? Because the guy was affecting the price of oil. War for oil? Yeah, he did a war for oil. And, by the way, he was the best finances that Africa had at the time. Okay, Obama had no problem doing that, but no, I don't want to save slaves, right? Okay, so, you know, why is the media not talking about African slavery today? Alright? Maybe their silence is complicit. Now, when we also talk about these things, you know, we have to look at the fact that we are not properly in these black or white categories. Myself, yes, I am a pale-skinned dude. Alright, I don't like the term white anymore. Now, I had to grow up with that put into my conscience like all of you have. Alright, so sometimes it kind of slips into conversation, but basically the reason why is because this puts stereotypes upon people. They say, well, you're European. No, I'm an American. And let me tell you something, that means a lot more than just my geography. Okay? My understanding of the law and the Constitution goes according to common law, which is inherited from British common law. Okay? Now, British common law borrows a whole lot from the Old Testament. And so basically, when I look at things, one of the things is that they have a tendency of shying away from overarching power. They would not want the courts to impose legislation. And what's happened is that the Europeans who are under the Catholic Roman canon law, that seeped through to the cities. And so the cities operate under this European thing, even though America was married to this British thing. And the British did separate themselves from the Europeans. This is a very important mindset, okay? When you look at what the Catholic Church did as far as the Inquisition, when you look and they'll say, oh, no, that was the government. Okay, fine. But the Europeans doing the Inquisition, all right, that was slavery, that was oppression, that was abuse. And so, yes, these people were running from that system. England was getting caught up in that system again through the monarchy. Okay? We did not want that. We wanted freedom. Now, let's think about this, okay? Is the foundation of America racist? If so, all right, are you saying to me that for someone of color, or pale, but let's say someone of color, are you saying that your freedom of speech is racist? Are you saying that your property rights is racist? Are you saying that your right to defend your own life is racist? Are you saying that the government not being allowed to force you to declare some sort of guilt is racist? These are rights that people like King, okay, people like, what was it, George Washington Carver? No. People like Sojourner Truth, all right? These are rights that they were fighting for. They weren't running from these things. The ability to have a free economy and start your own business is not racist. You see, because these are freedoms, they're not oppressions. And that's what our country's founded on. When Thomas Jefferson said, all men are created equal, you thinking that that is wrong means that you think that one race is superior to another, which is what? It is racist. Okay? And so when they go on the offensive, they're doing it because they don't want to admit their own racism. And when I say they, okay, let's really get a handle on what BLM is, okay? Because that is one of the biggest problems. Well, hold on. Let me hit this one theory though, okay? I was saying this earlier. I do not believe that white is a culture, okay? There was a civil war. There was a division of culture. Now, this is not to say that that division is the same as the current division. There's a lot of switching in and out. I understand that. But basically, the ideologies that we see today show that whites are never together. White people don't like white people. Alright? Honestly, we don't. Alright? I'm waiting to see this white club that Eddie Murphy used to talk about. Alright? But, you know, basically, these are not one culture, okay? You've got this atheistic communist culture. You've got this, these are the big groups, okay? There's little groups. Just as like other minorities in other countries and stuff, they're looking at this and they see three paradigms that they can fit into as well, okay? So you have this one. You have this Judeo-Christian evangelical culture, all right? And then you have the black culture. And the black culture has been, both through its minority nature, through its oppression, and then through its current manipulation, it is under the ideology of race. They think, okay, everything's broken down in race. Everybody else thinks this way, and we must think this way. So they said that process. The atheist and communist group says, we'll rely on man's reasoning. And this other group will say, we'll rely on our religious foundations. Okay, the black culture typically is more religious in their foundations, but then liberal in their philosophies. And basically keeping everything under that overarching race thing. Now, I believe what's happening is that these guys, okay, this has been a master culture. Alright, this communist white culture. That this group has, you know, descended from the northern culture, which controls the two. So basically, when you look at the South, what people don't realize is that a conservative estimate would be that 70% of the South, the whites, were what do they call it? They were not slave owners. Okay. Now, there were good and bad slave owners, like some that would abuse them, and some that would try to treat them well. And then you have like whites who, you know, are poor, and they may, you know, get along or not get along with people of color. Economic irritation usually would be the reason why there would be like a racist non-slaveholder. But also, there's a good base, probably 30%, that was in a friendly relationship with African Americans, and their cultures are, you know, oftentimes are perceived as nearly identical. Okay, so like, you know, it doesn't matter if you call it soul food or country food, it's fried chicken. Okay, and think about this, alright, my ancestors, alright, my name is Middle English, which goes back to Shingleton, which was a roofer. Alright, so they were like the poor guys in the English world. And then like most of my gene pool comes off of Irish, Scottish. Okay, but basically when you look at African Americans, and also another thing is why I'm not European is because my great-great-grandmother is a Cherokee Indian. Alright, so basically, and also like, I got some French side, there's a French side of my grandmother's side, and that has some Jewish ancestry somewhere along there too. But basically, when you look at these things, there's a lot of African Americans who are not perfectly African. Probably most. Okay, because they had the most interracial relationships every generation on down. And as a result of that, okay, I've got Irish ancestry, so does Martin Luther King, so does Muhammad Ali, so does Barack Obama. Okay, so we have the same gene pool. Okay, so, you know, you got a blend of like this skin to that skin. Okay, then what they did in the 60s is they try to extract, okay, they try to have those projects, alright, and the ghettos and all that kind of stuff, and they socialized this culture. They extracted it and socialized it out. And this is not to say, alright, this is not to like act as if there was not a great deal of oppression to anybody of color, but especially to African Americans. Especially what happened was you have this like tit for tat thing going on. Okay, so basically the North oppressed the South. Yes, it's true that, you know, the slaves were able to benefit and to get freedom, but a huge portion of that for those people, okay, 300,000 soldiers wiped out, not to mention what's going on at home, not to mention Northern Yankees coming down and raping white and black, by the way, okay? But, you know, raping, taking over, pillaging. Then they said, okay, all you Confederates, you no longer have the right to vote. The slaves, now you have the right to vote. So what the slaves do, they vote in all these Yankees who come down, they call them carpetbaggers, and then they oppressed the whole situation. And the first KKK was actually one that was just fighting the man. And they even protected some of the African farmers. Okay? So, you know, that was the first initial situation. But then these things played off of each other. And so the whites wanted revenge. Okay, so these Southerners wanted revenge, and that's where you have that backlash that hits there, and then it hits back, and we're seeing this going back and forth. Okay, it's like a big pinball effect. So it's not like I don't want to skip over that to ignore that, but I want you to understand what's going on all sides, because they're being played off against each other, so that now this communist group can take over. BLM itself is extremely communist. The founders were openly socialist communists. What you see with a communist group is they try to get the common people to rebel against the middle class. Alright, so the minorities rebel against the middle class, and then you see this in Nazi structures too, where they have this unofficial army. Okay, and they go out and they steal, they pillage, they cause chaos and all this kind of stuff. Well, that's what's going on here. You know, when we look at this, MLK was successful. How was he successful? Because he had a pacifist protest. And when he was passive, and these cops and whatever would then harass them, beat them, sick dogs on them, sick water on them, all that kind of stuff. Well, then they were victims, okay? Because they were not fighting their oppressors, but they were fighting them another way with a moral advantage. And what's going on with BLM is the opposite. They're not fighting with a moral advantage. Now, there is that huge base, so usually what you see is you see churches, you see people coming together out of naivete. Alright, they're like, we don't like the cops being oppressive. Amen. Okay. We care about people. Okay, so like, you know, I care, you know, I'm black, I care about my black family. I'm white, but I got black family, but I got black friends, but we got to get together. So this is all great, except it's under a criminal umbrella. Okay, they're naive, they don't realize what's really going on. And then the freaks come out at night. So then you see all this oppression going on. And so what do you see? Well, they say, you know, it's like, oh, okay, well, we saw 2 or 3 people on TV killed. So now let's kill a whole lot of more people. You know, so like, how many people know of, you know, what was it? I'm getting everybody. David Dorn. You know, a fellow African-American fellow who was a retired police officer and is watching his buddy's store. Okay, and the protesters come and they shoot him in the chest and kill him. Okay, you don't see a lot of memorial for that. All right, but when you see these different groups, what you see is that more people are dying from the protest than the deaths that they're protesting. Alright, you look over at Chad. 2 African-American guys were shot to death within that stupid structure. Okay? You know, we had somebody, we had somebody killed just the other day in Louisville, okay, this last weekend, and we knew that something was going to happen. So, it's like, hey, let's go out here and cause some trouble so somebody gets killed. Okay? Sometimes it's accidental, sometimes it's on purpose. Okay? But either which way, what we're seeing is more damage than good. And at the end of the day, okay, the Democrats are sitting there saying, we hear you, we're taking money from BLM, we hear you, right? Oh yeah, we hear you so much. Alright, well, I didn't really see that when it came to Charles Booker. Alright, he was the a Senate candidate looked really good, and yet they had this girl Amy or whatever, who the Democrats had backed the whole time, and said, no, no, she's the one, she's the one. And there was a lot of hostility, but in the end, they didn't care, okay? Because that's the whole point. This is how this manipulation works. I think a good way to understand this is like dealing with what I was talking about with Sojourner Truth. She got together with some of the feminist movement of her day, and they were all white women. And basically, you know, her concerns was about getting to keep her children and raise her children. You know, why was it she was forced in divorce, all this stuff. And these other women are like, well, we want to be able to wear these things. You know, we shouldn't be judged on how we wear our hair and blah, blah, blah. And so this rich white class that's going for the liberalism of that day, what they were doing is they were trivializing things. That's what you see today. You know, and I think about the Michael Jackson Black or White video. And at the end of the video, he turns into a Black Panther and he goes into an alley. He starts smashing the alley. Now in the video, it says, it's always graffiti with like KKK and Nazi and all that stuff. But originally, the way Michael Jackson had it was there was none of that. And it was artistically to show that the conditions of the ghettos were intolerable. And that is what made them violent, and that's what made them rebel. And that's why they're smashing things, taking trash cans to the windows. Okay? But then the rich white producers were like, oh no, what you need to do is put this on the windows. And that's what it's about, the symbols. Is it about the symbols or is it about real life? The BLM is not designed to be able to solve any of these problems. They can't deal with black on black crime. They can't deal with the fact that the whole system is under a Marxism and that the BLM is only producing Marxism. Think about this. You have these Democrat politicians, it don't matter if they're black or white, but these Democrat politicians will put rules upon the city, okay? And they have most of your African Americans stuck in the city, and they say, your business can't do this, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that, okay? Making all these stupid laws. So then what happens, alright? Maybe you're over in New York and you're selling cigarettes, okay? So when they do that, then they have to do what? They have to resort to the black market. Okay, they have to go into crime and other things and drugs and stuff to get ahead. Alright? And so then what happens? Well, all that money is made from these nefarious dealings. Well, all that gets funneled through the unions. And then that makes its way into the pockets of the Democrats when it comes to donations. And so the process just keeps on piling on and piling on. And what's BLM going to do? They're helping out the process. They're not helping anybody. They're not making any answers. When they talk about the problems of the cops are what? They're under the army of the mayors, and all the mayors tend to be Democrat. Constitutionally, you have a sheriff, and you elect a sheriff. And the sheriff should be able to serve and protect. But the police underneath the mayors are basically subject to the authority of the mayor. Okay? This is what happens. You watch Blue Bloods, okay? And Tom Selleck's like, I serve at the behest of the mayor. Well, they don't need to serve the mayor. They need to serve the community. And that's what you do with the sheriff. That's why you need a sheriff in a constitutional system. Okay? And when we realize this, and we start to love each other regardless of color, and realize that color means nothing. Height means more than color. Okay? Weight means more than color. Alright? Then we'll start to be able to understand and move forward. Okay? And understand that we're under a God who has no respect to persons.